What if the life you meticulously built for 50 years was a lie? What if the man you loved, the son you raised, decided in a single day to not just leave you, but to erase you completely? This is a story of a betrayal so profound it cracks the very foundations of a home, and a woman who discovers that the only way out is to dig deeper into the darkness. If you believe in justice and the strength of the human spirit, make sure you follow, like, and share this story. Hit that notification bell, because the secrets we're about to unearth in Maple Creek should have stayed buried forever. The sound was the first thing that felt wrong. Not the music, a soft jazz trio playing in the corner of the garden, or the gentle murmur of 50 conversations blending with the clinking of champagne flutes. It was a deeper sound, a hum of insincerity that vibrated up through the soles of Elizabeth's sensible heels. For 48 years, this house, this life, had been her masterpiece. Every polished floorboard, every perfectly pruned rosebush, every carefully chosen canapé was a testament to her devotion. At 68, she was the silent, efficient engine of Richard's world. Tonight, for his 70th birthday, the engine was running at full power. She smiled, a gesture she'd perfected over decades. One that reached her eyes just enough to seem genuine. She moved through the crowd, a ghost in a tasteful linen dress, topping up a glass here, offering a warm napkin there. People greeted her with affection. "Liz, the garden is stunning. Elizabeth, you've outdone yourself as always." They saw the house, the party, the success. They saw Richard's wife. They never truly saw her. Her son Daniel caught her eye from across the lawn. He was standing with his wife, Chloe. At 45, Daniel still had the boyish look he'd never quite shed. But it was overlaid now with a tension around his jaw. He was a vice president at a tech firm, a position Richard had helped him secure. Chloe, sleek and sharp in a dress that probably cost more than their first car, was a monument to modern ambition. She held her phone up, not taking a picture of the party, but filming a short, panning video for her Instagram story, her lips curved in a perfect, curated smile. She was documenting an experience, not living one. Elizabeth felt a familiar, quiet pang of disconnect. Her son's world was one of surfaces, of appearances, and Chloe was its architect. "Everything all right, Mum?" Daniel asked. His voice a little too loud as she approached. "Perfect, dear. Just making sure everyone is happy." Chloe lowered her phone, her smile tightening slightly. "It's a wonderful turnout, Elizabeth. Dad must be thrilled." She always called Richard Dad. It had started as a term of endearment, but over the years it had begun to sound like a claim of ownership. Richard, holding court near the large oak tree, laughed, a booming, charismatic sound that made heads turn. He was still a handsome man, his silver hair thick, his posture ramrod straight. He had the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life, a man who believed the world arranged itself for his convenience. Elizabeth had spent a lifetime making sure it did. He clinked a spoon against his glass, the sound cutting through the chatter. A hush fell over the garden. The jazz trio faded out. All eyes went to Richard. He stood there beaming, the setting sun catching the crystal of his champagne flute. Elizabeth felt a surge of pride. This was him, her Richard, the centre of gravity. "Thank you," he began, his voice rich and steady. "Thank you all for being here, 70 years. It's quite a milestone." He paused, letting the weight of the number settle. You look around at a life like this, at a home like this, with friends and family, and you think, what a success. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Elizabeth felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Something was wrong with his tone. It was the voice he used before firing someone at his old firm. Polished, reasonable, and utterly devoid of warmth.
"I've done a lot of thinking lately,"
he continued, his gaze sweeping over the crowd but never landing on her.
"About legacies, about what we leave behind, and about truth. The truth is, a man reaches a certain age and he starts to value honesty above all else. Honesty with his friends, his family.
And with himself. He took a slow sip of champagne. The silence was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing.
"For 48 years, Elizabeth and I have built a life together."
He finally looked at her, and his eyes were those of a stranger. There was no warmth, no shared history, only a calm, chilling resolve.
"And I am grateful for the part she has played. But a partnership can't survive on gratitude alone. It must be a partnership of equals."
Of minds and spirits that are aligned. The knot in Elizabeth's stomach tightened into a cold, sharp stone. She could feel the stares of 50 people turning towards her, a slow, collective swivel of heads. "And we are no longer aligned," Richard said, his voice ringing with a terrible clarity. "Elizabeth's fragility has become a weight that neither of us should have to bear into our final years. Her anxieties, her cognitive slowing. It is a burden. And so, in what I believe is the most honest and compassionate act I can perform for us both, I am announcing tonight that our marriage is over." The world stopped. The clinking glasses, the soft music, the scent of roses, it all vanished. There was only Richard's voice, a clinical scalpel carving her life into pieces. "I am divorcing her," he said, the words hanging in the stunned air. "This isn't an ending. It's a liberation for both of us. It is time for me to live my truth, and it is time for her to receive the specialized care her condition requires, without the pretense of a marriage that has in truth been over for years." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth saw phone screens light up, lenses pointing at her. She was no longer a person. She was a spectacle, a public execution. The woman scorned, the woman discarded, the mentally frail burden. He had written her obituary and was reading it aloud at his own birthday party. Every word was a lie, a twisted distortion of her quiet nature, her thoughtful pauses, her deference to him, all reframed as pathology. She stood, frozen, her own champagne flute heavy in her hand. She could feel the blood draining from her face. She looked at Daniel. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his shoes, his face pale. Chloe, however, was watching Elizabeth with a terrifyingly neutral expression, her gaze analytical, as if observing a chemical reaction. Whispers started, like a rustling of dry leaves.
"Did you hear that? My God, in front of everyone. Poor woman. He said cognitive slowing. I always thought she was just quiet."
Richard raised his glass. "So, a toast. Not to the past, but to an honest future." No one moved. The toast died in the air. Richard, for the first time, looked momentarily flustered. But then he simply lowered his glass, gave a tight nod, and turned his back on her, walking toward a small group of his closest business associates, as if he had just commented on the weather. The party was over. Her life was over. The two events felt one and the same. She was the guest of honor at her own funeral. The last car crunched down the gravel driveway, its red taillights disappearing into the Maple Creek twilight. The silence it left behind was heavier than the noise of the party had ever been. The garden was a wreck of abandoned glasses and trampled grass. Inside, the house felt cavernous and cold. The caterers had cleared most of the debris, but the ghost of the party lingered, a smear of lipstick on a napkin, the faint, cloying scent of champagne. Elizabeth stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the granite countertop. The stone was cold, unforgiving. She was trying to make her mind work, to process the shrapnel of Richard's words, but her thoughts were a panicked, scattering flock of birds. Fragility, burden, liberation. The words echoed in the sudden, deafening quiet. "Mom!" Daniel's voice made her jump. He was standing in the doorway with Chloe, who had a black leather portfolio tucked under her arm. They hadn't left. They had been waiting. "We need to talk," Daniel said, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor just past her shoulder. Chloe stepped forward, her heels clicking decisively on the tile. She placed the portfolio on the island and opened it. Her movements were efficient, devoid of any emotion. "Elizabeth," she began, her tone the one a doctor uses to deliver a terminal diagnosis, "we know this is a difficult time." The condescension was a slap. "A difficult time?" Elizabeth's voice was a raw whisper. "Your father, Dad did what he felt he had to do," Chloe cut in smoothly, her gaze unwavering. "Frankly, we agree it's for the best, which brings us to the next steps." She slid a glossy brochure across the island towards Elizabeth. On the cover, smiling, silver-haired seniors played lawn bowls in front of a stately brick building. "The Willows at Creekside, a community for your golden years." Elizabeth stared at it, uncomprehending. What is this?" "It's a lovely facility," Chloe said. "Top-rated. They have excellent on-site medical staff, activities, prepared meals. We've already put down a deposit for a private room for you." Daniel finally spoke, his voice a low mumble. "It's for the best, Mum. You need people who can look after you properly." The words were almost identical to Richard's, a script. They had all rehearsed this. The cold realization began to seep into the shock. This wasn't a spontaneous cruelty. It was a plan. "Look after me," Elizabeth found a sliver of her voice. "I don't need looking after. This is my home." Chloe's lips formed a thin, pitying line. "Actually, it isn't. Not anymore." She tapped a finger on a document inside the portfolio. It was covered in legal jargon, but Elizabeth could see the property address. Her address. "Dad has been the sole name on the deed for the last 30 years. He signed a transfer of ownership this morning." Elizabeth's mind reeled. She remembered that day 30 years ago. Richard had told her it was a simple refinancing, something to do with his business assets, that it was easier if only his name was on the paperwork. She had trusted him. She had always trusted him. A transfer to who? Elizabeth whispered, though she already knew the answer. She was looking right at it. "The house is being transferred into my family's trust," Chloe stated, as if discussing a minor stock transaction. "My parents, as you know, are in declining health. Their home is no longer suitable. This house, with its downstairs bedroom and accessible layout, is perfect for their needs. They'll be moving in at the end of the month." The betrayal was so absolute, so vast. It was like staring into an abyss. It wasn't just Richard, it was her son, her daughter-in-law. It was a conspiracy that wrapped her entire family in its cold embrace. "Daniel?"
Elizabeth's voice cracked, pleading. She turned to her son, the boy she had raised in this very house, whose scraped knees she had bandaged in this very kitchen. Daniel, look at me, please. He finally lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a miserable, cornered guilt. But there was no fight in him, only resignation. Mom, it's what's happening. Chloe's parents, they need this. It's a practical solution. A practical solution? She choked out. You're throwing me out of my home. Your home. You're trading your own mother for them. For his wife's family. For a bigger piece of a world she had never quite been allowed to enter. That's not what it is, he mumbled, the lie weak and unconvincing even to his own ears. It's exactly what it is, Chloe said, her voice sharp, cutting through his pathetic defence. We're giving you 1 week, Elizabeth. 1 week to pack your personal belongings. Clothes, some photos, whatever will fit in your room at the Willows. We'll have movers come next Saturday to take your things. After that, we need the house cleared for my parents. 1 week. 7 days to dismantle a life of 48 years. The cruelty was breathtaking in its efficiency. You can't do this, Elizabeth said, the words feeling useless and small. It's already done, Chloe replied, closing the portfolio with a soft final snap. The legal work is airtight. Richard and my father have been arranging this for months. Months. While Elizabeth had been planning Richard's 70th birthday party, he had been planning her eviction. While she had been picking out flowers, he had been signing away her entire world. The public humiliation, the false diagnosis of senility. It wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. It was to discredit her, to make her seem confused and unreliable, to ensure no one would listen if she tried to fight back. Daniel took a step forward. Mum, please, don't make this harder than it has to be. Elizabeth looked at her son, at his weak, pleading face. And for the first time she didn't see the boy she loved. She saw a stranger, an enforcer, a hollow man who would stand by and watch his mother be destroyed because he lacked the courage to stand up to his father or his wife. The love she felt for him didn't vanish, but it was suddenly encased in a thick, cold layer of ice. She said nothing. There were no more words. Chloe took Daniel's arm. We'll be back tomorrow to help you start sorting things. Get some rest, Elizabeth. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. They turned and left, their footsteps echoing in the massive empty hall. Elizabeth was left alone in the kitchen, her hands still pressed against the cold granite, the only solid thing in a world that had just dissolved around her. She wasn't just homeless, she was a prisoner, and her own son was her guard. That night the house was a tomb. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves against the window pane was a ghost of a memory. Elizabeth lay in the bed she had shared with Richard for nearly half a century, but the space beside her was not just empty. It was a void, a black hole that had swallowed her past. Sleep was a distant country she couldn't reach. The next morning, she came downstairs to find Chloe in the hallway, directing a handyman. He was replacing the lock on Elizabeth's bedroom door. "What are you doing?" Elizabeth asked, her voice raspy from a sleepless night. Chloe turned, her expression one of practiced patience. "Good morning, Elizabeth. We felt it was a necessary precaution for your own safety. We wouldn't want you wandering at night, getting confused." The lie was so bald-faced, so insulting. It left Elizabeth breathless. It wasn't for her safety. It was to lock her in, to control her movements in her own home. The handyman, a young man with kind eyes, looked deeply uncomfortable, refusing to meet her gaze. He finished his work quickly and left, leaving a set of new shiny keys in Chloe's outstretched hand. "Your old phone," Chloe said, changing the subject as she held out her hand. "I need to take it." "My phone? Why?" "It's a distraction. All that social media. It's not good for your state of mind. It will only upset you." Chloe produced a small plastic-wrapped object from her purse, a flip phone, the kind from a decade ago. "We've programmed our numbers into it, Daniel's and mine. That's all you need. If you need anything, you call us." Her connection to the world, her friends, her online banking, the news, the photos of a life she no longer had, was being severed. She was being systematically isolated, cut off from any potential source of help or support. Numbly, she handed over her smartphone. It felt like giving up her last piece of armor. Chloe slipped it into her purse without a second glance. Trapped. The word settled over her, heavy and suffocating. She retreated to her room, her cell, and sat in the armchair by the window, the one where she used to read in the afternoon sun. The new lock on the door felt like a physical presence, a silent guard. And then, in the suffocating quiet, the memories came. Not the happy, curated ones she kept on the mantelpiece, but the other ones, the small, sharp moments of erasure she had learned to ignore for the sake of peace. She remembered being 30, full of a quiet ambition to go back to university and finish her degree in art history. She'd brought it up to Richard over dinner, her heart fluttering with a nervous hope. He hadn't said no. He never said no directly. He'd smiled, his charming, patient smile. "Darling, that's a wonderful hobby," he'd said, patting her hand. "But when would you find the time, between running the house and raising Daniel and my career? Your support here is what makes everything else possible. You're the foundation, Liz, don't you see? My success is your success." And just like that, her ambition was demoted to a hobby, and then dismissed as impractical. She never mentioned it again. Well, here Renton, the green Irva. See, remembered their finances. He'd always handled them. "You don't need to worry your pretty little head about these things," he would say jovially. He gave her a generous allowance for the household and her personal spending, deposited into a separate account. At the time, it felt like being cared for. Now, she saw it for what it was. He hadn't given her an allowance, he had kept her on a leash. She had no access to their real wealth, no knowledge of their investments, no control. She was an employee on a salary, not a partner. A specific memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Her best friend from college, a fiery, independent woman named Sarah, had visited for a weekend. Sarah had questioned Richard's dominance, his subtle dismissals of Elizabeth's opinions. "He talks to you like a child, Liz," Sarah had said quietly in the kitchen. Richard must have overheard. A week later, he sat her down, his face a mask of concern. "Sweetheart, I think Sarah is a bad influence. She's so angry, bitter, I think. That kind of negativity isn't good for you. It's not healthy." He had framed it as concern for her well-being, but the message was clear. He isolated her, one friend at a time, until he was the only voice she heard, the only opinion that mattered. She looked around the rooms at the life she had managed. The beautiful furniture, the tasteful art, the family photos. It was all a set, a stage he had built for his life, and she was the unpaid, live-in stage manager. Her marriage hadn't been a partnership. It was a cage, a beautiful, comfortable, gilded cage she had willingly helped to build around herself, believing it was a sanctuary. And the most devastating realization of all settled in her soul. The door hadn't just been slammed shut. It had been locked from the outside. By her husband. By her son. She wasn't being freed. She was being transferred from one prison to another, smaller one. From the gilded cage of her home to the sterile beige box of an assisted living facility. Her life's work, her identity, her very self was being systematically dismantled and discarded like old furniture. And as she stared at the new alien lock on her bedroom door, Elizabeth knew that this wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a war she didn't even know how to fight. 2 days, 48 hours in a room that had once been her sanctuary, now a tastefully decorated cell. The lock on the door was new, a small, brutal circle of polished brass that gleamed with smug finality. Daniel and Chloe had been meticulous. They brought her meals on trays, their faces masks of strained, impatient concern. They had taken her smartphone, the one that held her contacts, her photos, her connection to a world that was rapidly shrinking to the size of these 4 walls. They had replaced it with a cheap plastic brick of a phone, a senior-friendly device, Chloe had called it, her voice laced with that infuriating saccharine pity. It had 2 buttons, one for Daniel, one for Chloe, a digital leash. Elizabeth had spent those 2 days watching the sun crawl across the floral wallpaper, the patterns swimming before her eyes. She thought of Richard, not the man from the party, the stranger with a voice like shattering glass, but the younger man, the one who used to hold her hand so tightly in the cinema she'd lose feeling in her fingers. She now recognized it not as affection, but as possession. Every memory was tainted, every shared smile a potential lie. She had been the perfect corporate wife, the silent partner in his ascent, and her reward was to be declared obsolete, an old piece of furniture to be discarded before the new owners moved in. On the second night, as the house settled into a heavy, watchful silence, Elizabeth made her decision. She would not be discarded. She would not fade away in some beige-walled facility, a ghost haunting the edges of her own family's new life. The plan was born of desperation and a lifetime of knowing exactly which levers to pull. She knew Daniel's deepest fear was a scene, public embarrassment, the disruption of his carefully curated, perfect life. She waited until she heard the distant chime of the grandfather clock in the hall strike 2. Then she began to gasp. It started small, a hitch in her breath, before she forced it into a ragged, wheezing cough that tore at her throat. She slid from the bed, knocking a water glass to the floor where it shattered with a satisfyingly loud crash. She crawled a few feet, her hand clutching her chest, and let out a strangled cry. She was a good actress. Decades of placating Richard, of smiling through his subtle cruelties at dinner parties, had been an unwitting rehearsal for this moment. Footsteps thundered in the hall. A key scraped in the new lock. The door flew open and Daniel stood there, silhouetted in the hallway light, his face a mess of sleep and panic. "Mum?" What is it? What's wrong? Chloe was behind him, pulling her silk robe tight. What's all the noise? Is she? Oh, for God's sake. Elizabeth ignored Chloe. She looked up at her son, her eyes wide with manufactured terror, and mouthed the word inhaler. She didn't have an inhaler. Her asthma was a mild, seasonal annoyance, not this suffocating monster. Daniel scrambled through her bedside table, his hands clumsy with panic. I can't find it. Where is it? Call an ambulance, Elizabeth wheezed, each word a monumental effort. No, we don't need an ambulance, Chloe hissed, stepping forward. She's probably just having a panic attack. Calm down, Elizabeth. Chloe, she can't breathe, Daniel snapped, his fear overriding his wife's cold logic for once. He was already fumbling with his phone, his thumb jabbing at the screen. Yes? Hello? I need an ambulance at 425 Silverwood Lane. My mother, I think she's having a severe asthma attack. She's 68. She's on the floor. The wail of the siren, growing closer, was the sound of the first crack in her prison wall. Chloe's face was a thundercloud of fury, but she could do nothing as the paramedics, professional and efficient, strapped an oxygen mask to Elizabeth's face and loaded her onto a gurney. As they wheeled her out, her eyes met Daniel's. She saw not concern but a flicker of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He wasn't worried for her life. He was worried about the neighbours. At the hospital, the emergency room was a cacophony of beeps and hushed voices. A doctor, a young woman with tired eyes, listened to her lungs, checked her oxygen levels, and declared her perfectly fine. Your vitals are excellent, Mrs. Lancaster, she said, clipping a chart to the foot of the bed. A bit of a scare, but you're not in any distress now. We'll keep you for another hour just for observation, but then you're free to go. Daniel and Chloe stood by the door, their relief palpable and unpleasant. See? Chloe said, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. I told you it was just a panic attack. All that fuss for nothing. We'll take you home now, Mum, Daniel said, his tone that of a parent dealing with a difficult toddler. Elizabeth pulled the oxygen mask from her face. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but as solid as granite. No. Daniel blinked. What? I said no. I am not going back to that house with you. Chloe stepped forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Don't be ridiculous, Elizabeth. Where else would you go? Don't make a scene. You are the one who made a scene, Elizabeth replied, her gaze unwavering. At my husband's birthday party. In my home. You have locked me in my own room. I am not going anywhere with you. A nurse glanced over, her expression curious. Daniel's face flushed a deep mottled red. Mum, this isn't the time or the place. It is precisely the time and the place, Elizabeth said, her strength growing with every word of defiance. You can leave now. I will be fine. We're not just leaving you here, he hissed. You are, she said, or I will start screaming. I will tell that nurse over there that my son and his wife have been holding me prisoner. How do you think that will look for your perfect life, Daniel? The threat landed with the force of a physical blow. He stared at her, seeing not his frail, compliant mother, but a stranger, a formidable one. Chloe grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Fine, she spat. Rot here for all I care. She pulled him out of the small, curtained room, and they were gone. For a moment, Elizabeth just breathed. The air, tasting of antiseptic and recycled fear, felt like the purest she had ever inhaled. She was alone. She was free. But she was also stranded. She slid off the bed, her legs a little shaky, and walked to the nurse's station. "Excuse me," she said to the nurse who had been watching them. "Could I possibly use your telephone? It's a local call." The nurse nodded, pushing a phone across the counter. "Dial 9 to get an outside line." Elizabeth's fingers trembled as she punched in the numbers. It was a number she knew by heart, one that hadn't been on the pre-approved list of her prison phone. It rang 3 times, and then a voice, groggy with sleep but instantly recognizable, answered. "Hello." "Leo?" she whispered. There was a pause, then the voice sharpened. "Grandma, is that you? What's wrong? It's like 3 in the morning." Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to stream down her face. "Leo, I need your help." In a rush of frantic, whispered words, she told him everything. The party, the divorce, the ultimatum from Daniel and Chloe, the locked room. She heard him sitting up, the rustle of bedsheets through the phone. Wait, slow down. They locked you in your room. Uncle Daniel did." The sleepiness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "Where are you now?" "I'm at Maple Creek General Hospital. I faked an asthma attack to get out." A short, humorless laugh came down the line. "Holy okay. That's... wow. Okay, Grandma. Don't move. Don't leave the hospital. I'm coming to get you. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Leo, your parents... They're out of town for the weekend. Don't worry about them. Just stay put. I'm on my way." He was as good as his word. 20 minutes later, Leo, all lanky limbs and nervous energy, hurried through the automatic doors. At 17, he carried the weary cynicism of his generation like a shield. But beneath the hoodie and the perpetually tired eyes, he had her heart. He was a good boy. He made his living astoundingly by playing video games on a platform called Twitch, his quick wit earning him a small but devoted following of online strangers. He was a creature of the digital world, a world Elizabeth barely understood. Right now, he was her only hope. He wrapped her in a hug that smelled faintly of pizza and ozone from his computer monitors. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I am now," she said, clinging to him. He led her out to his beat-up sedan, the back seat filled with empty energy drink cans. He didn't take her to his house. Instead, he drove to the edge of town, to a place called the Starlight Motel, a low-slung building with a flickering neon sign that promised clean rooms and colour TV. It was anonymous. Perfect. He paid for a room in cash and led her inside. It was sparse, clean, and smelled of lemon-scented cleaner. It was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. "Okay," he said, setting her small hospital bag on the bed. "You should be safe here for a bit. No one will look for you here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black rectangle of glass and metal. "This was my old phone. The battery's not great, but it works. It's connected to my data plan. Full internet, everything. I've programmed my number into it. Call me for anything. Anything at all." He placed the smartphone in her hand. It felt alien, powerful, a key. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Elizabeth had an uncensored, unfiltered connection to the world. She looked from the phone to her grandson's worried face. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The motel room, with its faded floral bedspread and a persistent hum from the ice machine down the hall, became their headquarters. After a day of deep, dreamless sleep, Elizabeth woke with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The fog of her old life was lifting, and the landscape it revealed was stark and treacherous, but it was real. "I have to go back to the house," she told Leo over coffee from the lobby, the bitter, burnt taste a welcome shock to her system. He nearly choked on his donut. "What? No way, Grandma. They'll just lock you up again, or worse." "I won't be staying," she said calmly. "I need to get a few things. Sentimental items, clothes. They can't legally deny me that, and you're going to come with me." "Me? Why me?" "Because you are my witness," she said, her eyes firm. "And because Chloe will be so busy watching you, the delinquent teenager, she might not watch me quite so closely." Her prediction was unnervingly accurate. When they pulled up to the house in Leo's car, Chloe was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed, a look of profound irritation on her face. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. Probably at work, projecting an image of calm stability while his life was quietly imploding. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Chloe said, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Finally decided to stop your little tantrum, Elizabeth. I've packed a bag for you. It has everything you'll need at the facility." "I'm not going to any facility, Chloe," Elizabeth said, walking past her toward the front door. "I'm here for some personal belongings you seem to have forgotten. My photo albums, for one." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "What do you want those dusty old things for? They're just clutter. I was going to throw them out." "That's why I'm here to save them," Elizabeth said, her voice even. "Leo will help me." Chloe's gaze shifted to Leo, dismissing him with a single condescending once-over. "Fine, you have 15 minutes, and I'll be watching you, both of you. I don't trust him not to steal the silverware." The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in passive aggression. Chloe followed them from room to room, her presence a heavy, suffocating weight. She commented on the dust. She pointed out items that would be going into storage. She treated Elizabeth like a senile intruder in her own home. In the study, stacks of boxes were piled high, marked in Chloe's aggressive black Sharpie: trash, donate, storage. In the trash pile were the leather-bound photo albums, a chronicle of 48 years of marriage, 48 years of her life. "I'll take these," Elizabeth said, her voice tight. "Suit yourself," Chloe shrugged. "Just adds to the junk you'll have to deal with." Elizabeth's hands moved methodically, stacking the heavy books, but as she did, one of the older, more battered albums slipped from her grasp, falling open on the floor. Tucked into the back sleeve, a place she hadn't looked in decades, was a single, faded Polaroid. She bent down to pick it up. The colours were washed out, the edges soft with age, but the image was sharp enough. It showed two men, young and confident, standing on a patch of barren, muddy earth dotted with sparse trees. One of them was Richard, his hair dark, his smile sharp and predatory even then. The other man. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. It took a moment for her brain to process it, to reconcile the slim, dark-haired man in the photo with the florid, silver-haired man she knew now. It was him, a much younger version of Chloe's father, Mr. Harrison. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a little too close, a shared look of triumph in their eyes. In the bottom corner, in faint, spidery ink, was a date. October 1985. Impossible. The story, the one trotted out at every Christmas and Thanksgiving, the bedrock of their family lore, was that Daniel and Chloe had met in college, a chance encounter in a library. The two families, the Lancasters and the Harrisons, were introduced years later, after the engagement. Richard and Mr. Harrison had supposedly shaken hands for the first time at a stuffy restaurant in 2005. But this photo told a different story. This photo, dated 1985, showed Richard and Mr. Harrison standing together on the exact plot of land where this house, her house, would be built a year later. They knew each other. They had known each other for decades. Their connection, their secret history, was literally tied to the very foundations of the home she was being evicted from. "Time's up," Chloe called from the doorway, her voice sharp. "Are you done collecting your junk?" Elizabeth's hand closed around the small, square photograph. It felt cold, heavy, a secret that had been dormant for nearly 40 years. "Yes," she said, her voice a near whisper, as she slid the Polaroid into her pocket. "We're done here." Back in the sterile anonymity of the Starlight Motel, the Polaroid lay on the cheap laminate nightstand between the two beds. It seemed to radiate a cold energy, a silent testament to a decades-long lie. "So they knew each other," Leo said, leaning over it. He had a teenager's flair for the dramatic, but his voice was serious, like way before they were supposed to. Big deal. Maybe they did a business deal and forgot about it. "No," Elizabeth said, her gaze fixed on the photo. "Richard never forgot a business deal. And you're Mr. Harrison. He built his entire career on real estate development in Maple Creek. Richard was in manufacturing. Their paths shouldn't have crossed back then. Not like this. Not on this specific piece of land before the house even existed." She looked at Leo, her eyes pleading. "The story they told us. The one about how you two met. It was a lie, Chloe's parents and Richard. Why would they lie about that?" Leo's curiosity, the intellectual hunger of a kid who spent his life navigating complex digital systems, was officially piqued. He picked up the photo, his eyes scanning it with an intensity Elizabeth had only ever seen him apply to a video game. 1985, he murmured, pulling his laptop from his backpack and flipping it open. Maple Creek. Let's see what the digital ghosts have to say. For the next hour, the only sounds in the room were the frantic, rhythmic clicking of the keyboard and the low hum of the computer's fan. Leo's face was illuminated by the screen's glow, his expression a mixture of concentration and growing excitement. He opened dozens of tabs, his fingers flying across the keys, entering search terms that made no sense to Elizabeth. He was cross-referencing public land purchase records from the mid-80s with county tax archives and business filings. He searched for Richard's name, Harrison's name, then known company names. "Okay, this is weird," he said, not looking up. The land was purchased in July of '85. The buyer was a shell corporation, Silverwood Holdings, LLC. Untraceable, dissolves a year later. The seller was the county. It was repossessed for unpaid taxes. He paused, leaning closer to the screen. From a guy named Marcus Thorne. The name meant nothing to Elizabeth. Who was Marcus Thorne? Let's find out. Leo's fingers danced again. He pulled up digitized versions of the old Maple Creek Chronicle. He scrolled through archives, his eyes scanning headlines. Okay, here we go. September 1985. Local businessman vanishes. Marcus Thorne. Owned a construction company. A direct competitor to Harrison's development firm. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, began to form in the pit of Elizabeth's stomach. He disappeared? Without a trace, Leo confirmed, his voice dropping. He read from the screen. Marcus Thorne, 42, was last seen on the evening of October 3rd, 1985. His car was found abandoned 2 days later. Leo stopped, his eyes widening. He looked from the screen to the Polaroid on the nightstand, then back to the screen. What is it? Elizabeth pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Leo, what does it say? He looked at her, his young face suddenly pale. His car was found abandoned on a service road, right next to the undeveloped Silverwood lots, near the very plot of land where you're telling me that picture was taken. The timeline, Grandma. The land gets sold in July. The rival businessman who used to own it disappears in early October, and then sometime that same month, Richard and Mr. Harrison are standing on that same land, smiling like they just won the lottery. The silence in the room was absolute. The humming of the ice machine had stopped. All Elizabeth could hear was the blood roaring in her ears. A coincidence.
It had to be a coincidence. But it wasn't. It was too neat, too perfect. A business rival vanishes. His land, now owned by a ghost company, becomes the site of a secret meeting between her husband and the man who benefited most from the rival's disappearance. The lie about how their families met was no longer just a strange social quirk. It was a cover-up. It was the first shovelful of dirt over something terrible. Armed with a flimsy 30-year-old photograph and a terrifying suspicion, Elizabeth knew she couldn't fight this alone. Leo's digital sleuthing had given her a thread, but she needed the force of the law to pull on it. He found a legal aid society downtown, a small, unassuming office tucked between a bail bondsman and a check-cashing store. The lawyer, a woman named Maria Sanchez, was sharp, sympathetic, and brutally direct. She had kind eyes, but a weary set to her mouth, the look of someone who had seen too many people chewed up by a system designed to protect the powerful. Elizabeth laid it all out, the divorce, the eviction, the locked room. She finished by placing the Polaroid on the worn surface of the desk. They knew each other, she said. My husband and my daughter-in-law's father, they lied about it for decades, and their secret is tied to the land my house is built on. Maria Sanchez listened patiently, her fingers steepled. She picked up the photo, studied it, then set it down gently. Okay, Elizabeth, I hear you, and I believe you, but now I have to tell you what the law hears. She leaned forward, and the kindness in her eyes was replaced by a clinical precision. First, the house. You said your name is not on the deed. No, it was always in Richard's name, for tax purposes, he said. To protect our assets. So, legally, the lawyer said, her voice flat, it is his house. To sell, to transfer, to give away as he sees fit. Your 48 years of marriage, of maintaining that home, of supporting his career. Emotionally, it makes you a partner. Legally, it makes you a long-term tenant. The words were a slap in the face. Second, the divorce your husband has filed, citing irreconcilable differences and your cognitive decline. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a faxed copy of a doctor's letterhead. He has a diagnosis from a Dr. Alistair Peterson. It states you've shown signs of memory loss, confusion and paranoia for the last 18 months. Dr. Peterson? We've never even met him. Are you sure? Maria asked gently. According to this, he saw you for a consultation 4 months ago. That's impossible. Then a memory surfaced, cold and clear. A charity luncheon Richard had insisted she attend. A pleasant, silver-haired man had sat at their table asking her benign questions about her childhood, about recent events. He'd said he was a friend of Richard's. He was at a lunch. Richard introduced him as a friend. The lawyer nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning on her face. Does the name Harrison mean anything to Dr. Peterson? I don't know.
Let me guess, Maria said, her tone laced with cynicism. He and Mr. Harrison are golf partners. Am I warm? Elizabeth just stared at her. The trap was so much more intricate than she had imagined. Every detail had been planned. The diagnosis was a weapon, designed to discredit her, to paint her as an unreliable narrator of her own life. And finally, Maria continued, tapping a finger on a thick sheaf of papers, this. The transfer of the property to a family trust, the Harrison Family Heritage Trust. It was pre-signed by Richard. His lawyers are from Blackwood and Finch, the biggest firm in the state. This document, she said, her voice softening with pity, is ironclad, watertight. To challenge it, we would have to prove that Richard was not of sound mind when he signed it, which is the exact opposite of the case they are building against you. Or we'd have to prove he signed under duress from the Harrisons, which seems unlikely. Legally, Elizabeth, your hands are tied. She leaned back, her expression one of genuine regret. The story they are selling to the court, and to the world, is that of a confused elderly woman lashing out vindictively at the end of a marriage, a woman who is, tragically, losing her grip on reality. And your son is helping them sell it. Elizabeth felt the air leave the room. The legal wall was higher and thicker than she had ever imagined. She wasn't just fighting her family, she was fighting a carefully constructed narrative, fortified by money, influence, and the cold, unfeeling machinery of the law. She walked out of that office, not defeated, but changed. If the system was designed to crush her, she would have to find a way to operate outside of it. Defeated, but not broken. The lawyer's words echoed in the stale air of the motel room. The law would not help her. The truth was irrelevant in the face of signed papers and manufactured diagnoses. She was adrift. She sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the Polaroid in her hand. She stared at the image of the two young men, at the muddy, empty ground beneath their feet. And then, a flicker. A memory not of an event, but of a feeling. The sharp, metallic tang of pure, unadulterated rage. It was years ago. Maybe 10, maybe 15. A water pipe had burst in the basement. A young plumber, a kid barely out of his teens, was tracing the pipes along the foundation wall. He had been moving toward the back of the basement, toward the dark corner behind the hulking ancient furnace, and Richard, who had been upstairs, had come down. He hadn't just told the boy to stop, he had exploded. Elizabeth could see it now, clear as day. Richard's face contorted with a fury she had never seen before or since. He had grabbed the young plumber's arm, his knuckles white. His voice had been low, shaking with menace. That area's off limits. The foundation is structurally compromised there. A repair. You don't go near it. Ever. The plumber, terrified, had packed his tools and practically run out of the house. At the time, Elizabeth had brushed it off as a strange, uncharacteristic outburst. Richard had been under a lot of stress at work. Now, filtered through the lens of the Polaroid and the story of the vanished businessman, the memory took on a horrifying new significance. A repair, she said aloud. What? Leo asked, looking up from his phone where he'd been scrolling through social media, a temporary escape from the grim reality of their situation. The basement, she said, her mind racing. There's a spot in the basement, behind the furnace. Richard always said it was a structural repair. Okay. It wasn't a repair, Leo. It was a warning. She stood up, a sudden, desperate energy surging through her. We have to go back. One more time. Leo shot up from his chair. Go back. Are you insane, Grandma? After what the lawyer said, Chloe will have changed the locks by now. They'll call the cops. Not if we go late at night, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. Not if we go through the basement window. It's old. The latch is loose. Richard always meant to fix it. A bitter laugh escaped her. He was always so busy with more important things. It took an hour of pleading, but he finally, reluctantly, agreed. His loyalty to her overrode his common sense. That night, under the sliver of a cold moon, they parked his car 2 blocks away and crept through the manicured gardens of her own neighbourhood like thieves. The house was dark, silent, a sleeping beast. The basement window well was thick with dead leaves and spiders. Leo, wiry and agile, managed to pry the old window open with a library card, just as she'd known he could. He dropped silently into the darkness, then helped her down. The air in the basement was cold and damp, thick with the smell of earth and dust and secrets. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum against the silence. Leo switched on his phone's flashlight, the thin beam cutting through the gloom. They crept past the laundry machines, the shelves of forgotten Christmas decorations, the ghosts of a family life that no longer existed. And there it was. Behind the furnace, just as she remembered. A large, rectangular patch of concrete on the floor. It was exactly as she remembered, and yet completely different. In the stark, direct beam of the flashlight, the details were chillingly clear. It wasn't like the rest of the rough, pitted concrete floor. This patch was smooth, almost polished. The colour was subtly wrong, a shade lighter, a sterile grey against the darker, time-stained floor around it. It wasn't a patch made to match. It was a seal. She knelt, her knees protesting on the cold ground. She ran her hand over its surface. It was unnaturally even, no cracks, no imperfections. A perfect, featureless rectangle, about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. It was a no-go zone, Richard had said, structurally compromised. It was a lie. Elizabeth looked at that smooth, pale slab of concrete, and the full, monstrous truth finally settled into place. The missing businessman, the secret meeting on this very land, the decades of lies. It all led here, to this dark corner of her home. The secret wasn't in the house's history. It wasn't in a file or a bank account. It was in the house itself, buried in its very foundation. The flickering neon sign of the Maple Creek Motor Inn cast a sickly green and pink glow into the small, sterile room. It was a light that didn't illuminate, but rather stained everything it touched. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke, an industrial-strength cleaner, a chemical ghost of 1,000 transient lives. Elizabeth sat on the edge of a bed with a stiff polyester comforter, her hands clasped in her lap. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. Filled with the low hum of the mini-fridge and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. Leo was hunched over his laptop at the small Formica table, the screen's blue light carving his young face out of the dimness. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a quiet, rhythmic tapping that was the only sign of progress in their stagnant world. "It's not enough," Leo said, not looking up. His voice was low, intense. "The photograph, the whispers, the legal wall, it's all circumstantial. They've built a fortress of lies, Grandma. We can't knock it down with pebbles." Elizabeth watched him, a flicker of the old fear returning. He was right. Richard and his allies were pillars of the community. She was a confused old woman in a cheap motel. Who would believe her? So what do we do, Leo? What can we do? The lawyer said, and the lawyer sees the fortress, Leo interrupted, finally turning to face her. His eyes were bright, fierce. He doesn't see the cracks. We don't need to knock the fortress down. We just need to show everyone where the cracks are. We need to make them look. He spun the laptop around. On the screen was a simple, stark logo he'd designed. The silhouette of a maple leaf cracked down the middle. Underneath it, in a clean, ominous font, were the words, Maple Creek Confidential. What is this? Elizabeth asked, leaning closer. It's our weapon, Leo said. It's a YouTube channel, a TikTok account, anonymous. We're not going to accuse anyone of anything. We're just going to tell a story. A fictional story, of course. He gave her a pointed look. About a powerful family in a small Oregon town. About a secret buried for decades. About a matriarch, the keeper of the family's heart, who was cast aside when she got too close to the truth. Elizabeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's faulty air conditioner. Leo, that's dangerous. What we're doing now is dangerous, he countered, his voice firm. Living in fear is dangerous. Letting them win is dangerous. Grandma, you told me how they are, Daniel and Chloe. They live on their phones. Their reputation, their image, it's everything to them. It's their religion. We're not going after them in a courtroom. We're going after them in their church. He began to outline the plan. They would use stock footage, generic shots of small towns, prosperous-looking homes, shadowy figures. He would narrate it, his voice altered by software to be a deep, unsettling baritone. The details would be just specific enough. He'd talk about a grand 70th birthday party, a shocking public announcement, a house built on a special piece of land in the mid-80s. We'll release it in short parts, Leo explained, his excitement growing. Little episodes, cliffhangers. We'll build an audience. We'll create a mystery right under their noses. People in Maple Creek will talk. They'll gossip. They'll start connecting the dots. We don't have to prove anything. We just have to plant the seed of doubt. The town will do the rest. Elizabeth looked from her grandson's determined face to the cracked maple leaf on the screen. It was a desperate, audacious plan. It was terrifying. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a spark of something other than fear ignited within her. It was a cold, sharp-edged flame, hope. "All right, Leo," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but steady. "Let's tell our story." The first video dropped on a Tuesday. It was only 90 seconds long. It opened with a slow-motion shot of a gavel hitting a block, followed by stock footage of a luxurious suburban house. Leo's disguised voice rumbled through the laptop speakers. "In every small town there are secrets," the voice began, layered over a subtle, unnerving soundtrack, secrets buried under manicured lawns and behind freshly painted doors. Welcome to Maple Creek Confidential. Tonight we begin a story. A fictional story, of course. It's about a king, a queen, and a castle built on a lie. The video cut to images of a birthday party, generic footage of champagne glasses clinking and older couples dancing. Our story begins at a celebration, the 70th birthday of a local titan, a man who built an empire. But as the candles were blown out, a different kind of fire was lit. The Queen, after nearly 50 years of silent service, was publicly dethroned, discarded. Why? What had she learned? What secret did the castle hold that was worth destroying a life to protect? The video ended with a close-up of a crack spreading across a concrete floor, then faded to black, showing only the Maple Creek Confidential logo. It was shared a dozen times within the hour. By the next morning it had over 1,000 views, nearly all from the Maple Creek area. The comments section was a flurry of speculation. Wait, Richard Peterson just had his 70th, didn't he? Is this about the Petersons? I heard some drama went down at that party. LOL, this is crazy. Who is making this? In their pristine, minimalist home, the one Elizabeth had painted and decorated and filled with life, Chloe was scrolling through her Instagram feed. Her thumb froze. A friend, one of the top real estate agents in town, had shared the video to her story. Has anyone seen this? So creepy and weirdly specific. Chloe's perfectly curated world tilted. She clicked the link. The disguised voice filled her silent kitchen. Her heart began to pound against her ribs. She played it again, and a third time. "Daniel!" she shrieked, her voice thin and sharp. Daniel came jogging down the stairs, still in his workout clothes, sweat glistening on his brow. "What's wrong? You sound like you saw a ghost." "Worse," she said, thrusting the phone at him. "Look at this." He watched it, his confident smile slowly dissolving. The colour drained from his face. "What the hell is this? It's a joke, right? Some stupid kid." 1,000 views, Daniel, Chloe hissed, snatching the phone back. "Read the comments. People are naming us. They're talking about your father's party." "My God, is this because of your mother? Is she doing this?" "My mother?" Daniel laughed, but it was a brittle, hollow sound. "She can barely use a TV remote. How would she make a TikTok horror movie?" "I don't know." Chloe was pacing now, her movements jerky, her hands twisting in front of her. "But this is a disaster. We have the charity gala for the Historical Society next month. I'm co-chair. People are going to be whispering. They're going to be looking at us." Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Chloe, darling, have you seen that bizarre Confidential video? So strange. It almost sounds like they're talking about Richard." "Call me." Daniel's phone buzzed. A group chat with his golf buddies. "Dude, is this about your family? Crazy stuff." The walls of their perfect life, once so solid, suddenly felt like glass, and everyone was staring. 2 days later, the second episode dropped. This one was titled The Gilded Cage. It used stock footage of an elderly woman staring out a window, her face sad and gaunt. The Queen was not just dethroned, the ominous voice narrated. She was imprisoned. Her own home became her cell. The locks were changed. Her voice to the outside world was silenced. Her captors? Her own blood. A son desperate for his father's approval, and his ambitious wife. A woman with her own family secrets to protect. They gave her an ultimatum, a cage in a nursing home or nothing. But they underestimated her. You can't imprison a woman who has already spent a lifetime in a cage. You only teach her how to find the key. The video ended on a shot of an old key turning in a rusty lock. The local Facebook group for Maple Creek exploded. The post sharing the video had hundreds of comments. The fictional story was now the only thing anyone was talking about. At the grocery store, people would fall silent when Chloe walked down the aisle. At the country club, Daniel felt the stares of his father's old colleagues. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a dull roar just beyond the edge of his hearing. Their carefully crafted image was shattering. The power couple, the perfect family, was becoming the subject of a sordid local soap opera. Chloe was getting fewer invitations. Daniel's business calls felt colder, more curt. The cracks were showing, and everyone was pointing at them. For Daniel, the pressure became unbearable. He wasn't like his father, a man of cold iron and hidden compartments. He was softer, a man who had lived his whole life in the shadow of that iron, desperate for its warmth, for its approval. He needed to be liked. He needed to be respected. This public humiliation was a stake through his heart. He saw his mother not as the source of the problem, but as the only possible solution. He had to make her stop. He had to put the Queen back in her box. He found the Maple Creek Motor Inn, listed in a dozen other cheap motels on the edge of town. It was the third one he tried. The sight of the peeling paint and the buzzing neon sign made his stomach churn with a mixture of pity and disgust. He knocked on the door to room 112. His knuckles rapping against the cheap hollow wood. The door opened a few inches, held by a security chain. Elizabeth's face appeared in the gap. She looked smaller than he remembered, and older, but her eyes were different. They weren't clouded with the familiar sadness he was used to. They were clear and watchful. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was flat, without surprise or welcome. "Mum, can I come in?" he asked, trying to sound gentle, concerned. "Please, we need to talk." She hesitated for a long moment, then slid the chain free. The room was even more depressing on the inside. He saw the laptop on the table, open. He saw the rumpled bed. This was where his mother lived now. A wave of genuine, if fleeting, guilt washed over him. This wasn't right. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, standing by the door, not inviting him to sit. He took a deep breath, letting his shoulders slump, trying to project exhaustion and sorrow. "Mum, what is happening? This online stuff, these videos. It has to stop." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Please," he begged, and the first tear, perfectly timed, welled in his eye. "Don't do this. Don't lie to me. I know you're hurt. I know Dad. I know what he did was awful. And I'm sorry, Mum. I am so sorry for my part in it. I was just trying to follow his plan, to keep things stable." He took a step closer. "Chloe is a wreck. People are saying the most horrible things. Our friends are turning on us. My business. Mum, you're destroying our lives." He reached out to touch her arm, but she flinched back. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He let his hand drop. "Think about when I was a kid," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, thick with manufactured emotion. "Remember when I fell out of the oak tree and broke my arm? You sat with me all night. You read to me. You told me everything would be okay. You were my hero, Mum. You always fixed things. You always put the family first." He was pushing the buttons, the ones he knew so well. Motherhood, sacrifice, family unity. For a second it worked. A flicker of the old Elizabeth surfaced. The mother who had kissed his scraped knees, who had defended him to teachers, who had loved him with a fierce, unconditional passion. A wave of pain and love and guilt crested within her. Her resolve trembled. Maybe he was right. What was she doing? Ruining her own son, the boy she had raised. But then she looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the weak chin, so unlike Richard's. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the same look he'd had as a boy when he'd lied about breaking a vase. It wasn't the look of a grieving son. It was the look of a cornered executive, terrified of a bad quarterly report. He wasn't seeing her, his mother. He was seeing a problem that was messing up his brand. He was a tool, his father's tool, his wife's tool. A weak, polished, hollow instrument. The wave of guilt receded, and in its place was a tide of cold, clear certainty. The softness in her eyes hardened into something that looked almost like porcelain. Beautiful, but unbreakable. "The family you're trying to save, Daniel, is a lie," she said, and her voice was no longer the flat tone of a victim. It was steady, resonant, filled with a power he had never heard before. "It's a story you all tell yourselves to feel good about the choices you've made. Your father's legacy, Chloe's social standing, your inheritance." He stared at her, stunned into silence. This was not his mother. "You talk about when you were a child," she continued, taking a step toward him, forcing him to take a step back. "Let me tell you about when I was a child. I was taught to be quiet, to be agreeable, to put everyone else first. I did it for your father for 48 years. I did it for you your entire life. I built my whole world around a family that wasn't a family at all. It was a business, and I was an asset to be managed." She stopped, her face just inches from his. The smell of his expensive cologne filled her nostrils, and it smelled like deceit. "You want me to go into a home? You want me to be quiet again? You want me to sign the papers and disappear so you and Chloe can have your dinner parties and your galas without being embarrassed by the crazy old woman your father threw away?" "Mom, no, it's not like that," he stammered, his face pale. "It is exactly like that," she said, her voice cutting through his protest. "You came here to manipulate me with memories because you are terrified of the truth. But the truth doesn't scare me anymore, Daniel. It's the only thing I have left." She gestured toward the door. "Go home to your wife. Go back to your perfect life. But know this. The story of this family will be told. All of it. And I won't be buried with it." Daniel stumbled back, his face a mask of disbelief and fear. He saw a stranger standing in his mother's place, a woman made of something far stronger than he could comprehend. He turned and fled without another word, the hollow rap of his expensive shoes echoing down the motel walkway. Elizabeth closed the door, sliding the chain back into place. Her hands were shaking, but her heart was calm. The final piece of the gilded cage had just rusted away. Her transformation was complete. She was no longer Richard's wife or Daniel's mother. She was Elizabeth, and she was free. She turned to see Leo standing in the doorway to the small bathroom, where he had been silently listening. He wasn't smiling. His expression was one of profound respect, mixed with a grim determination. "He's scared," Leo said quietly. "Yes," Elizabeth agreed, "but not scared enough. He thinks this is just about social standing. He thinks if he can weather the storm, it will all go away. He doesn't know what the storm is really about," Leo said, walking back to the laptop. "They're worried about the whispers, about what people think happened. They have no idea what actually happened." His failure with Daniel had lit a new fire under him. The emotional plea hadn't worked. The social pressure was good, but it was slow and it was indirect. They needed something harder, something irrefutable. Obstacle 2. The emotional manipulation had been cleared. Now it was time for obstacle 3, the practical, ugly truth. The photograph, Leo muttered, pulling up the scanned image of a young Richard and Mr. Harrison on the barren plot of land. 1985. We know what it is, we know where it is, but we still don't know why. Why this picture? Why this land? Your grandfather was furious when the plumber got too close to that spot in the basement, Elizabeth murmured, the memory now sharp and clear in her mind. It was more than anger, it was panic. So the secret isn't the land, Leo reasoned, his fingers starting to fly across the keyboard again. It's what's under the house. But we can't just call the police and say, dig here, based on a hunch and an old photo. They'd laugh us out of the station. We need more. He paused. There's always a money trail, Grandma. Always. For the next several days, the motel room became a war room. Leo, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of justice, dove headfirst into a digital rabbit hole. He used public records databases, archive business filings, and county property records. He taught himself to navigate labyrinthine financial documents that were designed to be confusing. He started with Richard's company, Peterson Development Corp. It all looked clean, standard. But then he cross-referenced it with Mr. Harrison's businesses. Harrison Properties, a successful commercial real estate firm. On the surface, they were friendly competitors, colleagues at the country club, nothing more. There's nothing here, Leo said in frustration after 2 solid days of searching. No direct payments, no shared accounts, no business deals. It wouldn't be direct, Leo, Elizabeth said, looking over his shoulder. She was seeing the world through new eyes now, the cynical, strategic eyes of her husband. Richard was never direct. He was a man of layers, of hidden compartments. He would have hidden it. Hidden it where? The answer came to him in the middle of the night. He sat bolt upright in his cot, the idea hitting him like a jolt of electricity. Shell corporations. He started again, but this time he wasn't looking for Peterson or Harrison. He was looking for anomalies. He searched for corporations registered in Delaware and Nevada known for their lax reporting laws that were established in the mid to late 1980s. He cross-referenced the names of the registered agents and board members, often just lawyers or third-party services, with known associates of Richard and Harrison. It was painstaking, mind-numbing work, dead end after dead end. Then he got a hit. A shell corporation called Summit Holdings, LLC, founded in 1986. Its purpose was listed as asset management. It was meaningless. But the registered agent was a law firm that Richard had used for a minor zoning dispute in the early 90s. It was a thin thread, but it was a thread. He dug deeper. Summit Holdings, LLC, owned a single asset, another shell corporation, this one called Ridgeback Investments. Ridgeback, in turn, received a quarterly payment from a third entity, Oak and Iron Financial. Grandma, what was the name of the first company Dad worked for, before he started his own? Leo asked, his eyes glued to the screen. Oakwood Capital, I think. He always said he learned everything there. Leo's blood ran cold. Oak and Iron, a slight variation, a nod to the past, a private joke for a man who loved them. He followed the trail of Oak and Iron. The payments weren't large, just a few $1,000s every quarter. Consistent, unwavering, for 38 years. He traced the payments from Oak and Iron backwards. They originated from a subsidiary of Peterson Development Corp., buried so deep in the corporate structure it was almost invisible. Money was being siphoned from Richard's company, laundered through 3 layers of corporate anonymity, and paid out. But to whom? The records for Ridgeback Investments were a dead end.
The payments just went into the void.
It was a digital brick wall. "I can't find who gets the money," Leo said, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's a perfect laundry cycle. The money's clean, and it disappears."
Elizabeth was silent for a long time,
staring at the complex chart Leo had drawn on a piece of motel stationery. "It's not blackmail for an affair," she said, her voice distant. "You don't pay someone for 40 years to keep an affair quiet. The leverage fades. People move on." She tapped the paper. "This is permanent. This is for something that never goes away." The name of the man from the newspaper article Leo had found weeks ago echoed in her mind. The businessman who had vanished in 1985.
the rival of Mr.
Harrison. "Leo," she said, her voice tight. "Look at Mr. Harrison's financials, not his business, his personal accounts. Mortgages, car loans, anything that would show a sudden influx of cash." "We can't get that without a subpoena," Leo said. "No," Elizabeth countered. "Look at what he didn't have. Did he have a mortgage on his house? Did he take out a loan for that new office building he built in 95? Leo's eyes widened. He switched his search. He pulled up public property records. Mr. Harrison's sprawling Tudor mansion, purchased in 1988, was bought with cash. No mortgage. Ever. The Harrison Tower downtown, a multi-million-dollar project completed in 1995. No construction loans on file, all financed internally. "My God," Leo whispered. "He was liquid. He was always liquid. He never needed to borrow a cent." The quarterly payments from Richard weren't his main income. They were just a retainer. The big payouts came when Harrison needed them, for big projects. But how? The trail was cold. "Think like Richard," Elizabeth urged, her mind racing. How would he do it? How would he give Harrison a huge sum of money without a record? And then she saw it, the missing piece. "The divorce, Leo," she said, her voice trembling as the horrifying truth began to dawn. "The house. He wasn't just kicking me out. He wasn't just giving the house to Daniel and Chloe." Leo stared at her, the blood draining from his face as he understood. "It's the final payment," he breathed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He's old, he's probably sick, he can't keep paying, so he's making one last giant payment to settle the debt for good." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening force. Richard hadn't paid Mr. Harrison to keep an affair secret. He had paid him to keep a murder secret. The man who vanished in 1985, Harrison's business rival, was buried in the foundation of their family home. Richard had provided the burial ground. Harrison had provided the body. And for 40 years, Richard had paid him for his silence. Blackmail. The divorce wasn't about her being a burden. It was the final, desperate transaction. Richard was handing over his most valuable asset, the house containing the evidence, to his co-conspirator. The one person whose interest in keeping that concrete slab undisturbed was as great as his own. And the marriage, Chloe and Daniel's marriage. It was an insurance policy, Elizabeth whispered, collapsing onto the edge of the bed. Her body felt like ice. It wasn't a love match, it was a merger, a joining of two criminal legacies, to bind the families, to ensure the secret was kept, even after they were gone. Her entire life, her marriage, her son's happiness, the home she had built. It was all constructed on top of a tomb of concrete and lies. The house wasn't a home, it was a crime scene. The marriage wasn't a partnership, it was a conspiracy. And her family was an unholy alliance. Leo looked at his grandmother, her face pale and shattered, and he felt a rage so pure and cold it burned. The social media campaign felt like a child's game now. They weren't just fighting for a house or for dignity. They were fighting for a man who had been erased from the world, a man whose only tombstone was a patch of smooth concrete in a suburban basement. And they were going to bring it all down, not just the whispers, the foundation itself. The air in the living room was thick with the cloying scent of cheap air freshener and smug satisfaction. It was the smell of a battle won before it had even begun. Richard sat in his favourite armchair, the one Elizabeth had always hated, its worn leather sighing under his weight. He had a look of magnanimous boredom, like a king granting a final, tedious audience to a peasant. Across from him, Chloe was perched on the edge of the sofa, a predatory stillness in her posture. Her phone was face down on the cushion beside her, but her fingers twitched, itching to check the social media validation that was her lifeblood. Her father, Mr. Harrison, sat beside her, a stout, silent man whose stillness felt different from his daughter's. It was the heavy, dense stillness of a stone at the bottom of a well, a man comfortable with secrets. And then there was Daniel, her son. He avoided her gaze, focusing on a loose thread on the rug, his face a mask of pained duty. He was trying to project an aura of sombre responsibility, as if this were a difficult but necessary act of love. The lie was so thin, it was transparent. Beside Elizabeth, her legal aid lawyer, a young woman named Sarah, with kind but tired eyes, shuffled her papers. Sarah was here to witness the signing, the final nail in the coffin of Elizabeth's old life. She thought she was here to facilitate a surrender. She had no idea she was about to become a spectator at an execution. "Well, Elizabeth," that Richard began, his voice oozing a false, syrupy patience. "We're all here, as you requested. One last look. I hope this brings you some closure." That Chloe let out an almost inaudible scoff. "Let's just get this over with. Dad and I have a dinner reservation." "Chloe, please," Daniel murmured, shooting a nervous glance at his wife, then at his mother. "This is hard enough for Mum." "Is it, Daniel?" Elizabeth's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's stale air like a shard of ice. Every head turned toward her. It was the first thing she had said since they all sat down. Daniel flinched. "Of course it is. We only want what's best for you. The facility is top-notch. They have a garden. You've always liked gardens." "A garden," Elizabeth repeated, her tone flat and unreadable. She looked around the room, not at the furniture or the photos on the wall, but at the very space they occupied. The space she had cleaned, decorated, and filled with life for nearly 50 years. A life that was not her own. "This was supposed to be my garden." "Mother, we've been over this," Daniel said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The house, the trust, it's for the family, for the future." "Chloe's family," Elizabeth corrected him, still quiet. "Our family," Chloe snapped, finally looking up from her phone. Her eyes were hard. "Daniel and I are a family. This house is our foundation. It was a generous gift from your husband." Richard smiled, a slow reptilian stretching of his lips. "Generosity is a virtue, Elizabeth, something you might have forgotten." He gestured to the papers in Sarah's lap. "Now, if you could move on to the practicalities, we don't have all day." Mr. Harrison shifted, his bulk causing the sofa springs to groan in protest. Richard's right. Let's finalise the paperwork. No sense in dragging this out. His voice was gravelly, unused. He was a man who spoke only when necessary. Elizabeth's gaze settled on him. She held it for a long moment, watching a flicker of something, annoyance, anxiety, cross his placid face. He looked away first. In the small guest bedroom just off the living room, Leo sat in the dark, his face illuminated by the glow of a laptop. The audio interface was live. The little green bars pulsed with every word spoken in the next room. On his screen, a counter ticked steadily upward. 5,487 viewers. The number was climbing fast. The citizens of Maple Creek were tuning in to the latest, most anticipated episode of Maple Creek Confidential. They thought it was fiction. They thought they were listening to a story. Elizabeth took a slow, deliberate breath. She could feel the collective impatience of her family pressing in on her. They saw an old woman defeated, clinging to her last moments in a home that was no longer hers. They were waiting for her to cry, to beg, to sign the papers and be swept away like dust. She reached into the simple canvas bag at her feet. It was the bag she'd packed for the hospital. The bag she'd carried out of this house like a refugee. Her hand closed around a small square piece of cardboard. Her fingers traced its worn, scalloped edges. "Before we sign anything," she said, her voice gaining a strange, resonant clarity, "there's one last piece of memorabilia I wanted to share." Daniel sighed. "Mum, if it's another photo album, we can have it sent to you." "No," she said, cutting him off. Her eyes were locked on Richard. "This one is special." She pulled her hand from the bag. She didn't look at what she was holding. She just placed it face down on the polished surface of the coffee table. It landed with a soft, definitive click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Chloe rolled her eyes. "For God's sake, what is it?" Richard leaned forward slightly, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Mr. Harrison remained perfectly still, a statue of tweed and impatience. Elizabeth looked from her husband to her son's father-in-law. She saw the alliance there, the decades of unspoken agreements, the shared history that had excluded her, imprisoned her. She saw the architects of her cage. "It's a Polaroid," she said. "From 1985, the year before this house was built." She let the silence hang in the air, a living, breathing thing. She watched Richard's condescending smile falter. She saw Mr. Harrison's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "It's a picture of two men," she continued, her voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand, "standing on this very plot of land, looking very proud of a deal they've just sealed." She paused, letting them fill in the blanks, letting the cold dread begin to seep into the room. Daniel looked confused, glancing between his father and Chloe's. The lawyer, Sarah, looked down at her papers, sensing a shift in the atmosphere she didn't understand. Chloe, ever impatient, reached for the photo. "Oh, let me see." Another trip down memory lane. "No," Elizabeth said, her voice sharp enough to make Chloe's hand recoil as if burned. Elizabeth fixed her gaze on Richard, then moved it to Mr. Harrison. She held the two of them in her sights. The air crackled. The smugness had evaporated, replaced by a tense, brittle watchfulness. She didn't need to flip the photo over. She didn't need them to see the image of their younger, triumphant selves. The secret wasn't in the picture. The secret was in the history it represented. The secret was what was missing from the frame. Or rather, who? She leaned forward, her back straight. the weight of 50 years of submission falling away from her shoulders like a heavy coat. She looked directly at Mr. Harrison, the silent stone at the bottom of the well. And with a voice that was not loud, but carried the weight of a final judgment, she said one name. Arthur Jennings. The name fell into the room and shattered the silence. It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's brow was furrowed in confusion. Arthur Jennings? Who's that? But he was the only one who didn't know. Richard's face, moments ago so full of smug authority, had gone slack. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, grey pallor. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The first to move was Harrison. The stone statue cracked. With a guttural roar, he lunged across the coffee table, his thick fingers reaching for the Polaroid. "Give me that!" "Don't touch it!" Richard shrieked, his voice a high, thin wire of panic. He scrambled to his feet, knocking over a side table. A lamp crashed to the floor. "You idiot! Sit down!" The sudden violence was shocking. Sarah, the lawyer, gasped and pushed her chair back, her files scattering. Daniel jumped up. "Dad, Mr. Harrison, what's going on?" Harrison ignored him. He glared at Richard, his face purple with rage, his hand still frozen in mid-air above the photograph. "You and your big mouth. You were always weak, Richard, always." "Me?" Richard's voice cracked. He pointed a trembling finger at Harrison. "You're the one who couldn't control himself. You're the one who got sloppy. I told you to wait. I told you to be smart about it." "Smart?" Harrison spat the word. "You call building a house on top of him smart? I wanted to take him out to the woods, but no, you had to be cheap. You couldn't stand to pay for a proper disposal, always cutting corners." The room had devolved into chaos. The carefully constructed facade of two powerful families was crumbling in real time, exposing the rot and decay beneath. Daniel stood between them, his hands up as if to stop a physical fight. "Stop it! What are you talking about? Disposal? Building a house on top of who?" His face was a canvas of dawning horror. He looked at his mother, who sat watching the implosion with a terrifying, serene calm. "Mum, what is this?" Elizabeth didn't answer him. Her work was done. She had simply lit the fuse.
"He was going to the press!"
Richard yelled, his words tumbling out, a confession disguised as an accusation. "Jennings found out about our land deal, about the zoning fraud. He was going to expose us, both. You said you'd handle it, Harrison. You said you'd just scare him off." "Scares don't work on men like Jennings," Harrison bellowed back, his voice echoing in the suddenly cavernous room. "He laughed in my face. He called me a small-time crook who got lucky. He threatened to ruin me, to ruin us all. I did what had to be done, for my family, for my daughter." He gestured wildly toward Chloe, who was now standing, her face ashen, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with social media. She looked from her father to Richard, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. This was the moment, the final, damning piece. He told me," Chloe stammered, looking at her father, her words a desperate plea for validation. "He told me years ago. He said Mr. Jennings was a bad man, a predator." She turned, her frantic gaze landing on Elizabeth, on the whole room. on the unseen audience hanging on her every word. She wasn't speaking to them. She was performing a defense for a jury that had already convicted her. Her voice rose to a hysterical shriek, the sound of a legacy of lies tearing apart at the seams. My father is a good man. He was protecting us. He had to do it. That man would have ruined us all. The words hung in the air, vibrating with the pure, unadulterated truth of a confession, an admission of knowledge, an admission of complicity. In the next room, Leo's eyes were wide. The viewer count on his laptop had crested 10,000. The chat log was a frantic, scrolling waterfall of shock and horror. He saw a message flash by, then another, then a dozen. Someone call 911, 124 Willow Creek Drive, now! And then, as if summoned by the collective will of 1,000 anonymous strangers, a new sound pierced the domestic drama, faint at first, a distant, mournful cry, then closer, sharper, the unmistakable rising and falling wail of police sirens. They grew louder, closer, splitting the quiet suburban air. Everyone froze. The shouting stopped. Richard's face contorted in disbelief. Harrison's rage collapsed into pure animal fear. Daniel looked toward the window, his expression completely blank, as if his mind had simply shut down to protect itself from the reality crashing down upon him. Chloe was the only one who seemed not to hear it. She was still staring at her father, her chest heaving. "I helped you," she whispered, a secret shared between them now broadcast to the world. "All those years, I helped you keep the secret. I married Daniel. For you, to keep the house safe, to keep him safe." The sirens were deafening now, stopping directly outside. Red and blue lights flashed across the living room walls, painting their horrified faces in strobing colours of judgment. A car door slammed, then another. Heavy footsteps pounded up the front walk. A loud, authoritative knock rattled the front door. "Maple Creek Police Department, open the door." No one moved. They were figures in a tableau of ruin, trapped in the crime scene they had called a home for 40 years. Elizabeth finally moved. She slowly, calmly picked up the Polaroid from the table. She looked at the image of the two young, arrogant men, standing on a patch of dirt, beaming with the success of their shared bloody secret. She tucked it back into her bag. Then she looked at Sarah, her lawyer, whose face was a mask of utter shock and dawning comprehension. "I don't think," Elizabeth said, her voice clear and steady above the pounding on the door, "that we'll be needing to sign those papers today." The yellow tape was a garish scar across the pristine white facade of the house. It cordoned off the manicured lawn, the rose bushes Elizabeth had tended for decades, the front door she had walked through 1,000,000 times. The house was no longer a home. It was a file, a case number, crime scene, do not cross. Through the window she could see the flashes of cameras as the forensics team worked. They were in the basement now. She imagined the sound of the jackhammer, the shattering of the concrete floor that had been the foundation of her life. The whispers from the concrete were finally screaming. Richard and Mr. Harrison were led out in handcuffs. They didn't look at each other. Richard looked shrunken, a deflated balloon of a man, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape that no longer existed. Harrison was stone once more, but this time it was the grim, resigned stillness of a man facing the consequences he had outrun for 40 years. Then came Chloe. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. The makeup she so carefully applied was a smeared, tragic mask. She looked wild-eyed, searching the small crowd of neighbours and reporters that had gathered. She was looking for a friendly face, for a camera she could perform for, but found only condemnation and morbid curiosity. She was no longer a local influencer. She was a monster in a true crime documentary. And Daniel. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't even questioned at first. He simply stood on the lawn, outside the yellow tape, a ghost at his own funeral. The police lights washed over his face, revealing nothing. His eyes were vacant, his body slack. He had built his entire identity on the foundation of his father's success and his wife's ambition. He had traded his mother, his morality, his soul, for a stake in their world. And in the space of 10 minutes, that world had been excavated, revealing a skeleton at its core. It had all been a lie. The business, the wealth, the marriage, the house. All of it. He saw Elizabeth standing by Leo's car across the street, a still, quiet figure watching the demolition of her family. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the chaos. He saw no triumph in her gaze, no hatred. He saw something far worse, pity, and then she turned away. The media frenzy was a hurricane. The Maple Creek Murder House, the Basement Bride. The story was a sensation, a lurid tale of suburban darkness that played on every news channel, every podcast, every TikTok feed for weeks. They clamoured for the woman at the centre of it all, the quiet wife who had brought down an empire with a single photograph. But Elizabeth was gone. She refused all interviews, issued no statements. She simply vanished, letting the story be told by the flashing lights and the screaming headlines, by the bones they pulled from her basement. She had said all she needed to say. The air smelled of fresh paint and strong coffee. Sunlight streamed through the large window of a small apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a bright, clean space, anonymous and new. It held no memories, no ghosts. It was a blank page. Months had passed. The legal tempests had raged and then subsided. The house on Willow Creek Drive, now infamous, was eventually sold at a deep discount to a morbidly curious developer who planned to tear it down. The courts had awarded Elizabeth her legal share of Richard's now frozen assets. She took only what the law prescribed, not a penny more. The money she once thought was her only path to security now felt like blood money, tainted by the secret it had been used to protect. She sat at a small kitchen table, a simple wooden thing, holding a warm mug in her hands. Across from her, Leo was scrolling through something on a tablet, a small smile on his face. The Maple Creek Confidential channel has 100,000 subscribers, he said, not looking up. People are still posting theories. Most of them think the anonymous storyteller was a disgruntled former employee of your ex-husband. Let them think that, Elizabeth said softly. She took a sip of her coffee. It was a cheap brand, but it was hot, and she had made it herself, in her own pot. The simple act felt like a profound luxury. They're turning it into a Netflix series, Leo added. They want to buy the rights to the channel name. I told them no. Good, she said. They sat in a comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who have been through a fire together and survived. The noise of the city, a distant, gentle hum, was the only soundtrack. She had lost everything. A husband of 48 years, her only son, the house she had poured her life into. By every conventional measure, she was a woman ruined. But the crushing weight that had settled on her shoulders for as long as she could remember was gone. The constant, low-grade anxiety of living in Richard's shadow, of navigating his moods, of shrinking herself to fit into the small box he had built for her, it had vanished. She looked past Leo, at her own reflection, in the clean glass of the window. The city skyline was a faint sketch behind the image of a woman she barely recognized. The face looking back at her was older, etched with lines of grief and struggle. But her eyes were different. They were clear. The guarded, fearful haze was gone. Her shoulders were back. There was a stillness in her, not of submission, but of self-possession. She had been a wife, a mother, a homemaker. Those were the roles she had been assigned. Now they were all gone. All that was left was her, Elizabeth, a stranger she was only just beginning to meet. The path ahead was terrifyingly empty, a blank map stretching into an unknown future, and it was the most glorious feeling she had ever known. She was finally, terrifyingly, and magnificently free.
What do you think was the most difficult choice Elizabeth had to make in her fight for freedom?
Was it confronting her own son? Or exposing a secret that would destroy so many lives, including her own past? Let us know in the comments below which part of her journey resonated with you the most, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.